Hi everyone. Last chapter, we ended our discussion on the kingdom of plants, going over the different types of non-vascular, seedless, vascular, and seed plants. We will now move on to a new group of species, kingdom Animalia, which is also one of my all-time favorite. This unit will be very interesting because this unit will be on all the diversity that Animal Kingdom has, and it will include chapters 32, 33, and 34. In this chapter, we will do first an overview of the animal diversity we have from back in time to the present, as well as the evolutionary evidence for their development. In addition, we will focus and discuss some of the traits that all animals share, even though it is a very, very diverse kingdom with millions of species and many, many phyla to talk about. To date, biologists say they have identified 1.3 million living species in the animal kingdom. And the estimates of the actual number they say will actually run a lot higher. So is we're just getting started with all this identification. Also, in addition, I want to add that I figured out how to do not disturb and like activate the do not disturb function. So we should even not be bothered by notifications. I apologize for that in the last chapter. All right, so let's get started. So it is important to note that listing features shared by all animals is challenging due to the fact that there are exceptions to nearly every trait we try to generalize for animal kingdom. It's just so diverse. So know that the traits we discuss in this unit usually goes with majority of the animals, but there is never a description where it suits 100% of all animals. And I just want to make sure I clarify that before I begin. But one thing we can say is that animals is a kingdom of consumers or heterotrophs, which means organisms that obtain energy and nutrients by eating other organisms. Now, remember we talked about plants being autotroph, specifically photoautotroph, because they can make their own food with sunlight. For animals, however, we are not autotroph. There can never be autotroph because we have to eat and get energy by eating other matter, organic or inorganic. There are many examples of the unique ways animals can capture their prey and being excellent consumers. So here are a few examples. First of all, if you've seen a chameleon before, you know that it has this long, sticky tongue with a very high speed that can capture its prey really quickly. It's almost like a split of a second that they can do that. When you look at, maybe online videos with chameleons, you probably have to slow down. They probably have to slow down the video for you to capture that slow motion of their tongue. That's one cool example of how animals are excellent consumers. And it is why we have this diversity of traits that animals have, including us humans, Homo sapiens, is because we have to adapt to different, prey or predators case. Second, predatory animals use strength, conceal traps, or toxins to capture their prey. So it is a lot more complex when we're talking about animals now compared to plants or bacteria for that matter, a little bit in the beginning. So throughout these two chapters, we'll talk about all these different animals, the way they're anatomically structured, and also how they're able to capture their prey, eat their food, etc. Third, herbivorous animals are stripping plants bare of leaves and seeds. We're just thinking about carnivores. They only eat meat, but don't forget that there are animals who are herbivores who will eat a lot of the plants, again, which is why we cannot afford to lose plant diversity. Some animals will only eat one particular species of plant. Koala bears is actually one of those very specific ones. Okay, I'll get there when I get to the picture. All right, so and then fourth example is that parasitic animals weaken hosts by consuming their tissues and body fluids. We will talk about parasites. There will be parasites in the next chapter where we talk about how they can just hide inside their host, whether it be human or another animal, and they can live in there, reproduce in there, and thrive in there. So Here are the key characteristics of animals that make them such an efficient consumers. Here's that little cute koala bear that I was talking about right here. They actually eat what's called eucalyptus leaves, and that particular leaves has to be that leaves. They will not eat any other leaves because supposedly what they eat from that leaves will actually pass on to their feces, and then that feces they actually feed their feces to their babies, so their babies acquire the enzymes to digest this particular leaves. So it is, that's why we cannot afford to have to lose plant species because we would lose the animals that depend on those plants for food. So again, reminder, hetero animals are heterotroph. They have to eat other things in order for it to survive and get energy from them. Second, tissues are formed from layers of embryonic cells. We'll talk about animal embryo a little bit in this chapter, and then, kind of go into how they're formed, but we won't go into too deep of a detail, but at least a gloss over how animal embryos are formed, just like how we talked about the life cycle of moss, ferns, and all the plants we talked about. Third, process food inside their bodies, and animals are able to have a very efficient digestive system. That is also something that's different, compared to plants and bacteria or even protists for that matter. We have digestive system where there's what's called an alimentary canal here that goes from the mouth all the way down to the anus. Some animals don't have alimentary canal, some do. We'll talk about those as we get to chapter 33. All right. And then nerve cells and muscle cells are specific kind of tissues that we have, animals have, for complex movements. Without muscle cells, you can't move. Without nerve cells, you can't tell the muscles when to move. I'll dive more into that when we get to that section. And lastly, animals can move and detect and capture potential prey, just as we've talked about with the chameleon, knowing exactly where their prey is and then sticking out their tongue at the right moment to capture the prey. That will be the interesting part when we get to chapter 33, talking about all the different invertebrates, and chapter 34, vertebrates, how they capture their prey, how they eat, etc. Pretty unique stuff we'll be talking about. Well, so that's why I said this unit will get interesting, much better than the first half if you don't like evolution and you don't like talking about plants. But animals will be a lot more interesting. And then the last week or last part of this class is about humans or the animal organ systems. So that will get interesting as well. All right. So although animal kingdom is very diverse, like I said, there's millions of species, but they do share several key traits, when we're talking about the animal kingdom as a whole. First, they have similar nutritional mold. Okay, this is again going back to the different ways we acquire energy. Plants are autotrophs, which they are the only species that can generate organic molecules through photosynthesis. There are bacteria that can do that, called cyanobacteria. If they are able to generate their own food from sunlight, they will usually do photosynthesis of some sort. They have to have chloroplast in there, then they will look green because of the fact that they need to have chloroplast in order to use the sunlight to turn things into food source or energy source. Second, fungi, which is a group we didn't talk about. I thought, like I said, 1407 covers such a big, huge part of biology that there's no time to spend talking about everything, all the five kingdoms. So I skip over fungi, and I'm going to skip over protists as well. We skipped over those two groups. That's why we're already in our animal groups. But just a gloss of it is fungi are heterotrophs as well. They either grow on their food source or they grow near their food source, and a lot of them will feed by absorption. meaning that they just kind of, drift around in that area, float around in that area, and then they would allow that food to be coming through into their body by diffusion. Sometimes, if it's something bigger that they need to digest, they may actually release enzymes to digest the food outside of their bodies first. So they release this enzyme, secrete it into their external environment. Those enzymes will start breaking down the food in the environment, and then as they pass through that area, they will allow all that food to be absorbed by diffusion. Um, Animals, like I've mentioned, they are heterotrophs, and we have to eat living organisms, non-living organic materials in order to stay alive. And contrary to fungi, we have to ingest food, and then there are enzymes inside our digestive system that will break down that food into energy and all the other resources that we can get, whether it be ATP, nucleic acids, lipids, amino acids, etc. So this is just a fun comic right here about autotroph versus heterotroph. Here's a little plant here saying, "I made this. I made my own food," and then here comes a heterotroph, just eat right that off, eat that right off. I think this is from Amoeba Sisters. Like I said, I love them. They create these really cute cartoons about biology. All right. Second is cell structure and specialization. Remember, in Bio 1406, we collectively call, these structures outside of the plasma membrane the cell extracellular matrix, or ECM. And it turns out that these purple lines right here are specific proteins called collagen fibers. We talk a lot about collagen fibers in AMP 1, okay, but in 1406 we didn't really mention them too much, just briefly went over them, but they are existent on the external side or external environment of our cells. If anything, they're actually the most abundant type of fibers we have for maintaining cell structure. So that's why cell structure has to do with collagen protein. So we've mentioned that plants, fungi, and animals are all multicellular eukaryotes. Again, don't forget eukaryote definition of that is they have a true nucleus with a nuclear envelope surrounding it. That's why prokaryotes are then those that don't have the true nucleus. It's just DNA floating around in the cytoplasm. Okay. And in contrast to plants, the animals do not have cell walls. We don't generate cell walls. If anything, we don't have any criteria to synthesize cellulose. We don't have any structure like that. We also cannot digest cellulose, which is why when we eat plants, a lot of times we see a lot of fiber that comes out, as feces, is because of the fact that we can't digest it in a sense, which is why they say if you eat plants, it cleanses your system, because all those fibers that we can't digest is just moving through your a whole digestive tract, cleansing it out, and then taking whatever things with it. And that's why when you eat a lot of plant fibers, you have an easy time doing defecation, because of the fact that there's in a sense, a lot smoother ride in that sense. Okay. All right, so we don't have cell walls in our animal cells, but we do have collagen instead as the main protein for structural support and also cell-to-cell connection outside of the cell membrane, because that's very important for connecting our whole body. Remember, if we go back to hierarchy of your, organization of the body, you have chemicals that becomes molecules. Molecules come together to form your organelles and cells, and many cells would then come together to form your tissues, and it is these tissue that forms your organs. So that's why you have to have some sort of cell-to-cell connection outside of the cell membrane to keep everything together, or else we'll have things breaking apart, falling apart, and leaking out. All right. So most animals, like I said, are organized into tissues, which is defined as groups of similar cells that act as a functional unit, or they have a similar function or a purpose inside your body. We talk a lot about tissue in AMP1. where we talk about, here's this group of cells that does a lot of absorption, and here's this group of cells that synthesize stomach acid in your stomach. Here's a group of cells that is for secreting or for protection purposes, and here's a group of cells for secretion purposes, etc. So a lot of different purposes and different type of tissues exist in all our organ system, which is why it's a big topic in anatomy and physiology. One of the big ones we talked about in AMP1 was muscle and nervous tissue. And if you ask anybody to have taken AMP, these are two difficult chapters. No one would say that muscles and nervous tissue was the easiest chapter ever they have taken. It is very long with a lot of little parts to it, but we're not going to dive that deep into that here. But just know that muscles are very important for movements, and how those movements are generated is because of all the little molecules that's doing its thing. Without muscle tissues, we cannot move at all, because what allows for movement are the contractions that we can do, kind of like a spring in your muscles. Imagine little springs in your muscles, okay? If you will be taking AMP1, know that, like I said, we will talk all about how beautiful this whole reaction is, this whole process is, yet there's very intricate action steps that must happen, in a perfect series of synchronized manner, okay? Or you can call it I like to call it choreography, that allows for a muscle to contract. In addition, muscle movements are actually not possible without an electrical impulse telling it what to do. So that's why you have nervous tissue for conducting nerve impulses. Muscles are just sitting there doing nothing unless they're, of course, heart muscles is a different story where they still require electrical impulse, but it doesn't require our conscious thinking. But imagine if you want to lift your hand and start writing notes right now, that's all your brain telling your muscles what to do, which muscle to contract in order to give you a swift movement of writing your notes. So, muscle movement, like I said, are not possible without electrical impulse. It's kind of like you turning on a main light switch, and then when you turn on that light switch, the moment it's on, it sends all those electricity to different wires, okay, around your house to turn on all the lights. Let's say you have a main light switch that turns on multiple lights. It's kind of like that. Same with muscles. You don't want them to just contract whenever and however they want. You want them to move for a purpose and under self-voluntary means, unless it's for other purpose where you want it to do its own thing. But we're talking about voluntary movements. Then you have to have all those things going on, all those wires telling it what to do. So having nervous tissue is like having a computer with electrical wiring that connects to everything and tells them what to do in your body. This is why plants can't move like animals do, because they don't have muscles and they don't have a nervous system. It is mainly adaptations for animals that plants and fungi don't have. All right, like I said, although the animal kingdom is very diverse, here's a third trait that animals will share when taken as a whole. You have reproduction and development. Well, animal cells usually do sexual reproduction, where there is a diploid stage of some sort that dominates your life cycle. If you remember from Bio 1406, we spent a whole chapter talking about reproduction, cellular reproduction specifically, whether it be mitosis or meiosis, and those stages that gives you haploid gametes, sperm and egg cells. So all that is part of our animal cell life cycle. So there are haploid stage where it is your sperm and egg, where your sperm and egg should have half the amount of chromosome. That's what haploid means, in case you forget. Haploid means you have half the amount of chromosomes than your parents, and then or than what you have. Diploid is then your homologous chromosome having 2 copies of every one of those 23 chromosomes. So for humans, we have 46 chromosomes as our diploid, and then haploids will have 23 chromosomes, half of that. And haploids are produced by meiosis. Now, flagellated sperm will then fertilize a non-motile egg. Going back to our pattern of talking about life cycle with plants, we're talking about animals in this case. And, flagellated sperm is something we have to have. Yeah, I mean, no, we don't, the sperm don't come out of our body and then swim through some water and then get to your egg cell. It is inside the reproductive tract that that's all happening. Usually that's the case. Now, there are some animals where the males would actually sort of eject a bag of sperm, a sac of sperm, and then the female will kind of roll over it or touch over it in order for them to take those sperm into her body. So that different animals will have different modes of sexual reproduction, but all of them require sexual reproduction. No, um, yeah. So zygote undergoes cleavage. So once your flagellated sperm, which is, let me draw it right here, sperm going towards the egg, once the sperm goes fused with the egg cell, it will form your zygote right here. From zygote, then it starts undergoing cell division, specifically called cleavage, which is when we have even mitotic cell division. Now, as the embryo gets, more older and older, as it gets into more mature development, things will not be so evenly divided anymore because you will have cells going to form a heart. You have cells that go on to form your skin, and you have cells going on to form your bones, etc. So, the cell division later and later in the developmental cycle will be more and more complex. But in the beginning, that's why they call it cleavage, is because there's even mitotic cell divisions where one cell, evenly divides into two cell evenly divides into four, etc., etc., until you get a whole ball of cells called the blastula. And within the blastula, it's actually usually hollow like that. And that is what we call the blastula stage. The hollow space within is what we call as blastocele. A good suffix to remember, cele usually means some sort, or word in that case, some sort of hollow area. Okay, so this is a hollow space within the blastula, so that's why it's called the blastocele. Um, they didn't talk about morula stage, but it's okay. Just going straight from the egg cell stage into the blastula, in which blastula will have that empty space. But before this, usually there's a morula stage where it's a dense ball of cells with no compartments yet. But they're going straight to blastula with that little space in between. So blastula will then undergo what's called gastrulation. This is where the embryo starts producing embryonic layers, which are tissues that will develop into adult body parts. So once we start to have an indentation of some sort going in towards the blastocele, that's why you had to have a blastocele within the blastula, is because when the embryo undergoes gastrulation, all of these cells start migrating inwards toward the center of the sphere, hollow ball, and they will start to form outer layer versus inner layer. So that's why you have what's called the ectoderm as the outer layer and the endoderm as the inner layer. And for some cells, they will produce a third layer called mesoderm. We'll talk about all of these layers a little bit later in the lecture. But that's what gastrula stage is after gastrulations, you have these different layers within the embryos. That's why we call this embryonic stage the gastrula stage. And now within the endoderm, there's another hollow space that is formed now called the archenteron. We'll talk more about this when we get to the specific animal embryos and what do we call them differently when we have 2-layer versus 3-layer, etc. All right. So most animals, unlike humans, because human usually from the gastrulation stage, they kind of grow and develop directly into adults. But most animals actually have at least one larval stage in their whole entire life cycle. Okay, so for humans, we don't have larval stage. But a lot of animals, for example, if you think about a lot of bugs, okay, insects, they have a larval stage. What is a larva, though? So a larva is usually a sexually immature form of an animal. So They are usually very morphologically distinct from the adult stage, meaning they don't look like or even resemble the adult form at all, shape, color, even sometimes. And they eat different kind of food sometimes. In addition, they may even live in completely different habitat when you compare larval stage with the adult stage. And again, we'll talk more about this in chapter 33 when we get to some parasites actually like to have their larvae live in a certain animal, and then those larvae will then move on to another animal species in order for them to grow into adults and thrive there. But for now, we can use the example of mosquito or dragonfly, which are actually aquatic larvae, meaning that at their larva stage, these insects or these larvae will be swimming in the water, and then when they become an adult they will then become a flying insect. So here's an example of that dragonfly life cycle where you have eggs that is going into the water, and then the eggs hatch into larvae that looks like this. They live in water for a little while until they molt and transform into your adult. So that's why your larva stage looks very different morphologically speaking from the adult stage. And larva usually undergoes a whole big process called metamorphosis, as we all know. That's how butterflies come to be. They go into this little cocoon. That caterpillar will go into a little cocoon. Within the cocoon, that little caterpillar will undergo a lot of transformation called metamorphosis. And then when the butterfly is ready, it will break out of the cocoon and become a beautiful butterfly that looks nothing like the caterpillar before. So that's why metamorphosis is a developmental transformation for the animal. I know you're like, well, I don't usually tend to think of insects as animal. Now we're talking about animal, not like our common term animal. We're talking about animals in terms of the animal kingdom. So this is still going back to that classification hierarchy levels. So we're talking about the animal kingdom, which does include insects as one of their species. Okay, of course, they're under a completely different phylum compared to humans, but still, they're all under the animal kingdom. All right, so after this transformation for metamorphosis, usually larvae will be considered as a juvenile, which resemble and look more like the adults, but they are not sexually mature yet until they become an adult. Okay. All right, so I wanted to show you these videos here where you can see the zygotes of a sea urchin. And usually in anatomy and physiology, we actually have microscope slides of these embryos. Of the sea urchins to look at, but I thought it was cool to look at it like live, what happens in a video where you can see all the stage of the sea urchin embryo going through all that cleavage from zygote all the way to blastula or even gastrula in real time. So you will see it form a blastocele, that hollow space I talked about, and then it will become the blastula stage. And then the second video here, um, oops, here, and then we will actually it will see it going through the process of gastrulation, and you can see the movement of the cells, like they just know exactly what to do and where to go from a hollow tube that will ultimately become the organism's digestive tract. So it's super cool to me that, these cells just know what to do all on its own without any nervous tissue inside here at the moment. Okay, it's just cells like stem cells that know what to do. So it's all based on the fact that they have their DNA sequence tells them what to do. So let's look at the first phase first, going from a zygote to a blastula. So you see how quickly that was? How big it wasn't. Let me go back. So it was a zygote really quick, splits into cleavage of 2-cell stage, really quick, goes into 4, 8, and then multicellular that you can't even count anymore. And then you see that hollow space in the center like that, that's the blastocele inside the blastula. And then it just kind of wanders all over to start moving more probably. And then it will become the second part here, which is then your gastrulation stage, where there's that indentation I was talking about. Oh man, let me go back. Yeah, there's that indentation I was talking about that starts to form at the bottom of the blastula, and they will start forming this layer inside of the blastocele to give you your ectoderm and your endoderm of the gastrula now. So once it completes its gastrulation stage, forming that hollow tube that you saw as it was going inwards. Okay, so you see this little hollow tube starting to form inside. Once that is completed, that's where we call it a gastrula. So having this little empty area is where it starts to form its what you can call the rudimentary digestive tract. And for some simpler organism is literally just a hollow space, and we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 33. All right. Okay, so this leads to then our, next common trait, which is um, genes or molecular homology in genes to control animal development. Now, they are similar across a broad range of taxa when we're talking about molecular homology. One set of DNA sequences that all animals share is called homeoboxes, when we abbreviate homeoboxes, they're called Hox genes. So these are genes that regulate large scale anatomical features in early stages of embryonic development that helps to the cells to do what's called differentiation. Differentiation means that you have this stem cell becoming another type of cell. That's what cell differentiation means. A stem cell from not even looking like or doing anything like what a heart cardiac muscle cell does, it will turn and differentiate into a cardiac muscle cell. And then another stem cells will differentiate into a skeletal muscle cell, etc. That's what we mean by cell differentiation. And then morphogenesis is then the actual production of different shapes and structure and organs, etc. So these Hox genes is what control the gene expression of other genes that influence the morphology by switching on in different segments of the body. We'll talk about segmentations when we get to next chapter on, especially when we get to arthropods on insects. But it is the gene activity that tells your cells where to go, where should it be in the body, what structure it should grow. Okay, because if you look at the human body, you have a head, you have a neck, you have shoulders and arms. I mean, imagine if something goes wrong and then your hand starts growing out of your ear and then your mouth is on your thigh. So where the body parts go in their correct positions turns out that it is determined by a group of genes called the Hox genes. So Hox genes is just for the purpose of telling genes when to turn on, when to turn off, where does it go, what structure it needs to become. Okay. So it's kind of like the direction or directory genes that tells everything what to do. All right. So the order of Hox genes on the chromosome is the same order as they appear along the body. So here are the Hox genes in, let's say, the chromosome of the Drosophila, which is the fruit fly chromosome. And each one of these color boxes are the Hox genes that control the genes that, tells it what to form. And they can see that the order in which they appear on the chromosome goes with the order in which it appears on the larva, as well as the final insect. So, for example, Hox genes in the head of the fruit fly will direct the growth of mouth parts, the antennae, and then whereas genes that are active in the thorax around this area should be directing the growth of legs right here and also wings. So that's why you have these Hox genes going down the chromosome, and they kind of aligns with how different parts of the bug is to be grown in a sense. Now, if you look at this picture here on the left image, it actually shows how how a normal fruit fly should look like under the microscope. I would think this is most likely a scanning electron microscope in this case. And the right picture here shows you that what's happened when there is a mutation in one of those Hox genes. So instead of antenna that is growing out from the head here, you see that there's now legs going out of the where the antenna is supposed to go. Legs were literally growing out of this particular fly's head. Um, and similar case here where you have the normal fruit fly here showing you that it only has one pair of wings and one thorax. Thorax, this little body section of the bug here. And then when you have a homeotic mutation of some sort, like Hox mutation, like, if there was a duplication, let's say you didn't change it out or swap it out or you delete it out, but you actually add another one, a duplication, that will result in formation of two thoraxes. That's why you see two, though this kind of like a walnut shaped thing, two of those, and also two sets of wings instead of just one. So this whole work on fruit flies demonstrated the cells within the antennae actually carry all the information that's needed to become leg cells. That's why you have legs growing out of the antennae area. Now, they just need the correct regulator gene, which is then the Hox gene, that tells the cells where to go, which gene needs to be expressed in what location. So that's why then, even though you can have all the normal genes in your body for making a leg, for making a body, for making a wings in the Drosophilus case, but if you mess up their Hox genes, they're not going to have a normal um, growth of the body. So going back to this picture here, remember that it shows us the larva stage of the fruit fly that is made up of repeating units, or we'll learn in the next chapter they're called segments. So it is the Hox genes that are switched on in different segments that allows for a different pattern of growth. So the pattern of Hox gene activity will give each segment its identity in a sense, telling it where should a particular part of the body should be and what structures should grow. And the order on the chromosome in which the Hox genes appear, it is the same order in the way that genes will be expressed as it appears along the body, whether it be larval stage or the final adult stage. Now, this is definitely a very interesting area of developmental biology research. If any of you are interested in research, feel free to talk to me, text me, and I can tell you my experience. Now, I wasn't interested in developmental biology, but I've heard of Hox genes when I went to seminars, and people have developmental biology projects. So there are a lot of research going on about how embryos grow, how insects or certain organisms grow from your zygote all the way to their adult stage. And that's how they discover Hox genes. So and let me know if you're ever interested in learning more about what biology research is like. I do host a series of undergraduate research at Richland campus at Dallas College, but it's only specific certain amount of time. Again, if you're interested, feel free to talk to me. All right, so homeotic transformations are mutations in Hox genes that will lead to these bizarre growth of the body parts. So technically speaking, which, this kind of goes with why every one of our cells have our whole 46 chromosomes. And they're supposed to be the same cell, whether it be the cell in your same set of DNA, whether it be in your eye, cells of your leg, etc. They all have the same set of DNA. But how can we tell it to become an eye? How can we tell this to become a thigh muscle? Well, that's all because then of the Hox genes that tell it what to do, what portion of your chromosomes, which particular genes should be expressed when is this particular type of cells. Okay. All right. So that's a pretty interesting area of biology. All right, and then when biologists looked at all the organisms on Earth, they were actually able to identify about approximately 1.3 million living species of animals. That's a lot. It's probably the most diverse kingdom we have in the life forms. Okay, so usually it is also very diverse, very, very diverse. We have a very large range of different morphological variations. I mean, just think of we corals are considered as animals. Cockroach is also considered as an animal, and then you have crocodiles that are also considered as animals. I think the book kind of did this purposely with the, so, all these words started with a CO, some of some sort. They kind of sound like the first syllable, but they're all different, very, very different animals, from their outside to how they eat, what kind of appendages they have, etc. So, morphological and molecular evidence show us that, just like how we talked about, it is the green algae that became the plant. Now, let's look at what is the closest living relatives of animals. Well, they found out that and then proposed a phylogeny that animals' closest living relative is, according to evolution, is something called choanoflagellates. Choanoflagellates right here. And how did animals arise then from their single cell ancestor? Because choanoflagellates are single cell organisms that kind of look like this, which they say it actually resembles choanoflagellate or choanocytes within sponges. Okay, sponge is the simplest form of animal that we'll talk about, or the next in lineage, in evolutionary lineage that we'll talk about in the next chapter. But that's how they say that, because there's choanocytes that looks exactly like the flagellated or your choanoflagellates. That's why they say that it is our living animals living closest relative is the choanoflagellate. Now, origin of multicellularity requires evolution of new ways that the cells can attach to each other. I mean, just think of, you have all these single cells around. How are you going to start putting them together and fit them to each other so that they can become a piece of tissue? A piece of tissue then folds three-dimensionally to form your hollow organs, such as your stomach, your trachea, your esophagus, etc. So these cells need to have a way of coming together, and they also have to have a way to communicate with each other. If you think of the cardiac muscle cell, every one of those cells have a way to tell each other, hey, we got to beat in a rhythm so that we can get the heart pumping the correct way. Okay, things we'll talk about in anatomy and physiology too, is that they have a way to communicate with each other so that they make sure that they are pumping or contracting in a way that allows for the heart to move in a rhythmic pattern. All right, so researchers compare genome of unicellular choanoflagellate, which is single cell organism called Monocyga brevicollis. Okay, so this is the scientific name of the specific species of choanoflagellate, and so they compared this specific species to animals and uncovered that there are 78 protein domains that is shared with animals. Now, what is domain? You're like, 78 protein domain. What is that? Domain is the key structural functional region of a protein. That's what we mean by protein domain. This particular part is the key part of the protein that gives it its structure or its function. So, for example, one specific protein is called cadherin. And cadherin, it goes with, is a protein that goes with how animal cells attach to one another. So you can think of it as, without the C, you have adherin. So this is a cadherin protein that allows for adhesion of some sort. So that's how you can easily remember what that protein is for exam purposes. Okay, adherin for adhering to something. In this case, adhering cells together. So DNA sequences analysis show that animal version of cadherin proteins had domains that are also found in choanoflagellates. If anything, 78 protein domain were shared between animal and choanoflagellates, the specific species of choanoflagellates. And then they also discovered that animal cadherin proteins also incorporation of a novel domain that is absent in choanoflagellates. This particular novel domain is called the CCD region. So in this particular image here, you have all these little yellow blocks. All those yellow blocks are then the cadherin domain that is similar amongst whether you're a mouse, a fruit fly, or a hydra. So all of these yellow are similar sequences of the protein domains. Um, and then for animals, there's addition of this red part, which is the CCD region. So, but you notice how like different animals will have different lengths of all of these protein domains. So they say that transition to multicellular cellularity in animals involve new ways of using proteins, and then they figured out, well, by evolution and natural selection, that by rearrangements of these domains and adding new domains on top of something, you get a more complex species, such as the animal species. So we talked about this back from evolution chapter, talking about, evolution and natural selection is not designing a new organism from scratch. They go with whatever was already formed, how to better its traits so that there's, variation in the genes, and then these variations are selected according to the environment they're in. And that's why you see they say that this is a sense proving that we have come from choanoflagellate because of the fact that we share these protein domains with them, and it's just a rearrangement, or take some of it and leave out some of it, and then due to use and disuse, for example, of natural selection, and then you add your own sequence into what's already formed. So this is what, and in a sense, supports the fact that we came from single cell organisms called choanoflagellates, according to science. All right, so fossil records are how animal, shows, because there's no way for us to see how animals have evolved from these choanoflagellates. There's only fossil evidence of how animals have evolved over a long, 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 long period of time. And they technically say that animal species, or animal kingdom specifically, have evolved over four total geologic eras: the the Neoproterozoic era, the Paleozoic era, the Mesozoic era, and the Cenozoic era. Each of these geologic eras include different time periods as well, with different names, but we're not going to get into there. There's a lot of terms that you have to remember already, so I will just mention a few of those periods as we go on to talk about the major events that have happened in these era, and you have to know those particular periods, but we don't need to go through every period in these particular eras. So first, let's start with the Neoproterozoic era, which is dated from 1 billion years ago to 541 million years ago. This is actually the first generally accepted macroscopic fossils of animals were found, and they date it all the way back from about 560 million years ago. So technically speaking, they think that the first appearance of animal kingdom, or animals in the animal kingdom, was from 560 million years ago. And in the fossils, they can tell that these are probably soft-bodied multicellular eukaryotes. And they found multiple organisms that look like that in the fossils. So they just collectively call these group of animals Ediacara biota. At least good thing for our sake, because if I make you memorize every scientific name of every creature that's out there, you will have a headache. And so that's why I just know, Ediacara biota is what the first generation of these particular creatures or organisms that are considered as your first animals, first macroscopic animals. So they kind of look like this and this right here. And you don't have to know those names. Just, recognize that these are examples of Ediacara biota. Cloudina, now that one you have to know. Cloudina is a specific species of animals that, where fossils of this particular species, they say, show early evidence of predation. So that's a big thing because, when we're talking about plants and, bacteria and things like that, there was no predator-prey type of relationship. So when you start to have animals, that's where that relationship started to form and develop. and have evolved. So how did they came up with, oh, this is the first evidence of predation, is that looking at this fossil of the Cloudina, note that this is not the whole organism. These organisms kind of look like little caterpillars, like humongous macroscopic caterpillars, like really large, and with some appendages at the end. So this is just looking at one part of it. It kind of looks like that, with like things coming out like that. If you can look it up, like if you look Google Cloudina, they will show you like images of that. I just don't have room on this slide to put in that picture. But they say within the fossil, they see these holes, and these round bore holes. They say it resembles predators drilling through the shells of the prey, where the soft bodies can be found, and they can suck up or eat up that soft body from within. So that's how they say, oh, there's a hole within this fossil. And I'm sure they found more than one to conclude that, hey, some sort of predation is starting to appear in our fossil record of animal species. So fossil evidence indicate that it is this Ediacaran period. There is that period you have to know, from 635 million years ago to 541 million years ago. This was a time they see as increasing of animal diversity. Okay, they can observe. Is not a huge amount of the animal diversity, but they start to see, okay, there's more different type of animal species that we're seeing all of a sudden when we get to that particular strata in our fossil record that dates back to be about the Ediacaran period. That's when we start to see all these emergence of different appearance or morphologically distinct creatures that don't look like plants or bacteria. These are macroscopic things that is not like bacteria, and also doesn't shape like a plant either. So that's how they conclude that these are appearance of the first animal species. So moving on to the next era, which is your Paleozoic era. So this is from 541 to 252 million years ago. This is a very important era, your Paleozoic era, because another humongous wave of animal diversification occurred in the Cambrian period. So again, this is where another period you have to know within the Paleozoic era. This particular period dates from 535 to 525 million years ago, and it is known as the Cambrian explosion. You might have heard that from other places before, but Cambrian explosion is that period back in time where we saw all these species are just exploding. Hundreds and hundreds of different fossils of species they have discovered within the strata. So in the fossil strata before the Cambrian period, only a few animal phyla was observed, which goes back with that Ediacaran period where we say, okay, there's some increasing animal diversity. But once they got to the Cambrian period, in those fossil strata, fossils are about 50% of all living animal phyla were found. Like 50% of all living animal phyla. And we have a lot of phyla. On top of that, we already mentioned that there's millions of species we're talking about. So they were able to find their first arthropods, the first chordates, and the first echinoderms. So arthropods are the insects and crustacean type of creatures. Chordates go with vertebrates, mostly vertebrates, and some few invertebrates. And the echinoderms then goes with your starfishes, etc. So those are examples of those. So most Cambrian fossils, what they saw when they looked at these fossils of species, is that they call them bilaterians. Okay, what do you mean by bilaterians? It means that these are organisms with bilaterally symmetric form, and that they have a complete digestive tract with a mouth at one end and anus of the other. So we'll talk more about bilaterians and radiosymmetry. So these are two different types of symmetry. We'll talk about that. But they saw that in these Cambrian fossils, most of the animals there are bilaterally symmetric. And then as diversity of animal phyla in the Cambrian period increased, they also saw that the diversity of the Ediacaran life forms declined, and that Ediacaran biota we talked about earlier, those species start to be gone and disappear from the strata as we see more of these new animal phyla species appearing. So then the scientists want to ask, why is this happening? Well, there are three hypotheses as to why Ediacaran life are declining and Cambrian period life forms are increasing. First, there's fossil evidence that suggests predators have acquired novel adaptations for catching their prey. Not pretty, excuse me. I don't know where that happened. Okay, prey. So, for example, there's claws that they see in species now. So, when you have predators traits like claws, your prey species will also need to acquire new defenses, such as protective shells that kind of battle or compete against the claws, so that you're not easily eaten as you would. So in the early Cambrian period, they see appearance of these predator traits, and then they see appearance of prey traits as a response to the predator traits. So new predator-prey relationships emerge in these Cambrian period. So they think that, they hypothesize that natural selection is what led to the decline of soft-bodied Ediacaran species, because they are soft-bodied, so they're easily to be eaten up. So if you don't have those specific protective shells, you will probably die off because you were the species that will be preyed on. Hence, it was natural selection that selected for species with more protective means. So this, in a sense, favors a rise of various bilaterian phyla. Now, Cambrian period was preceded by increase in atmospheric oxygen. They have somehow discovered that, and that they say that the fact that you have more oxygen, it enabled for animals with higher metabolic rates and larger size to thrive, because as you can see in this sort of make-believe picture, drawn picture by an artist here of how Cambrian explosion would look like at that time. From very microscopic species to small species, and now we have a lot macroscopic, large species. And they say this because now the environment is right in the Cambrian period, with all this oxygen around to power the entire large bodies of these animals. Third hypothesis has to do with, again, Hox genes. So they say the origin of Hox genes and also addition of new microRNA. MicroRNA is a subset of small RNA that is involved in gene regulation, just like the Hox genes. And they have facilitated evolution of new body forms. So they think that it is in this Cambrian period that Hox genes start to come into play, microRNA start to come into play, and that's why it changed and gave a lot of different ways you can recombine, rearrange DNA sequences such that you have formation of this whole big diversity of species. So microRNA, while we're on that topic, is actually a very interesting topic. It was discovered actually quite recently. It was around 1993 to early 2000 was when microRNA has been confirmed to be found as doing what they're supposed to do, which is in gene regulation. Now we know a lot more about them and actually able to use them in biology research to study gene regulation and diseases, including autoimmune diseases. And if you know about autoimmune diseases, you know that till this day, a lot of autoimmune disease do not have a final cure. You have to be on some sort of medication for the rest of your life to suppress the immune response or do something else that can alleviate the patient's feelings. So, or patient's pain, itchiness, things like that. So a lot of autoimmune diseases is just, kind of a mystery as to why your immune system start attacking your body all of a sudden. But they say they have something to do with microRNA. So now we understand microRNA are small non-coding RNAs, meaning that they don't code for proteins like messenger RNA does. Just a little spiel about what microRNA is. Give me some moments. Now, the fact this actually microRNA play a very important role in the post-transcriptional gene regulation by binding to mRNA molecule. Okay, remember from 1406, we said the whole process of protein synthesis, you start with genes within your nucleus, and then transcription happens and outspits a messenger RNA. Messenger RNA goes into the cytoplasm, and then they go through translation process and outspits your chain of amino acid called the polypeptide chain that will form ultimately your protein. So either microRNA, they say, works by either inhibiting the translation process by stopping the messenger RNA from being translated to your protein, or they think that it can actually initiate mRNA degradation and then take it out altogether, which means microRNA is usually for inhibition of gene expression. It stops the protein from being expressed, is what microRNA does. Now, the topic of gene regulation is super interesting. And if you have to go on to take genetics, which maybe some of you do, that's why you're in this class. If you're thinking about pharmacy, all that, medical schools, you have to take the whole biology series along with genetics. You will for sure learn all the many ways, or other than pharmacy, you have PA as well. But anyway, so you will for sure learn all the many ways in your genetics class how gene expression can be controlled by within a cell. So I personally love genetics, minus the math part, of course, because population genetics and statistical analysis was not fun for me either when I was a undergrad. So I try to do it the way as simple as possible when we went into population genetics earlier in the semester. So, math is definitely on the bottom of my favorite bio topic list when we're talking about all those statistical analysis, things like that. But anyway, um, this is, genetics itself is very interesting topic when we're talking about gene regulation expression. And microRNA is one of those that actually not only impact us now, they think it also impacted back then when animal species were developing in these geologic eras. So last point here is that vertebrates colonized land around 365 million years ago, which is still within this Paleozoic era, and that they diversified into numerous terrestrial groups. Two of these still survive today after the Permian extinction. I'll talk about that in a bit. But two of those species still survive today are amphibians, which are frogs and your salamanders, and your amniotes, which are your reptiles, birds, and mammals. We'll get to those when we get to the next chapters. But what is the Permian extinction? Well, Permian extinction was one of Earth's most severe mass extinction events. Turns out that this is something interesting. Turns out that there were five total in mass extinction in the entire Earth's history. And this one is the most devastating. That's why you have to know Permian extinction. So there's Cambrian explosion, which is, this creation of new species, or not creation, but like, natural selection, evolution of new species, a whole bunch of them. And then you have this Permian extinction that took them a lot of them out. And it was so devastating that people actually call it the Great Dying Period. And this is and approximately, they say 96% of species were lost in this catastrophe. Many forests were destroyed, and a diverse group of animals that were apex predators of their day, they were gone as well. It is the loss of these species that may have cleared the path for the earliest dinosaurs and first mammals, because right now we still don't have those yet. We don't have mammals yet. We don't have dinosaurs yet. It was most likely the disappearance of these ancient apex predators that allows for these new species to have evolved. And they say why Permian extinction have happened, because you might ask why all of these animals have died. They say it is most likely caused by intense volcanic activities, elevated carbon dioxide levels and sulfur levels from the volcanoes. Then those cause what's called ocean acidification, cause acid rain, and then global warming. So it was just, they say, a very highly toxic environment for life at all. So it is marked as the end of the Paleozoic era, and that's where we end this era with this particular extinction, because of the fact that a lot of different species have died off due to this major change in the environment of the earth. So that's why we move on to the next era. So the next era is the Mesozoic era, which is goes from 252 million years to 66 million years ago. Animal phyla began to spread now to new habitats. So now animal phyla are in the oceans where you have first emergence or discovery of coral reefs. Coral reefs are formed. When there's coral reef, there that means there's marine animals that are now inhabiting the ocean. Reptiles, they say, have also returned to the water, which is why then you have what's called the plesiosaurs starts to form. And then on land, there's origin of wings now, where you have the ability to fly. So this was the Pterosaurs and the birds, which have the ability to fly, and then you have large and small dinosaurs that emerge. Now you have those dinosaurs that are predators, like the T-Rex, and then you have those that are herbivores, like the long necks. So first, this is also the emergence of the first mammal as well. So Mesozoic era is the era like of a new change of animal diversity, where you have animals, mammals, dinosaurs, birds in the sky, things swimming around in the ocean, etc. Now, again, another mass extinction have wiped out many of the dinosaurs from the Mesozoic era and other terrestrial and marine animals as well, including the marine reptiles, which is why, we don't see a lot of those today because they have been extinct now due to these mass extinction. Remember, I mentioned that there are 5 mass extinctions. So that Permian extinction was just one of them. Here's another one in the Mesozoic era, which then ends the Mesozoic era, leading to the 4th geologic era of animal species is Cenozoic era, which goes from 66 million years ago to present. They say that another mass extinction has happened again. Now, you're like, why are there all these mass extinction going on? Well, all of them have to do with some sort of volcanic activity, some sort of environmental change where it took out a lot of the oxygen, or there's all of a sudden very quick cooling of the environment, things like that. These are talking about like mass environmental changes that don't allow these animals to survive anymore. So this particular mass extinction killed 75% of all species, including the remaining non-flying dinosaurs. And they say that is possibly due to an asteroid impact. So this is where you see in movies, a big meteoroid asteroid fell down on the Earth, caused a big explosion, and then it killed off a lot of the dinosaur species. That's why that's what, they say ultimately lead to the extinction of dinosaurs that we don't have today. Not that I'm complaining. If we're living with them right now, that will be a scary thing. That will be Jurassic Park. Just a joke on the side. Anyway, so the rise of large mammalian herbivores and predators have started to happen in the Cenozoic era. Now that, like I said, there are global climate change in this era that gradually cooled during the Cenozoic, and this actually triggers shifts in many animal lineages. So instead of being very hot ancient Earth, now you have cooling of the Earth, and primates are now adapting themselves to open woodlands, to savannas, and that's why back in the day we have the mammoth. You see the zebra here, and then there's also primates around and humans as well. Of course, mammoth is no longer around. They're extinct from the Cenozoic era. All right, I know it's 1 hour, 6 minutes, but I want to finish this before I go to part 2. So this is just a picture of the 5 mass extinction I talked about. It's not from the book, it's from National Geographic. It's not going to be on the exam or anything like that. But in case you're curious about the 5 mass extinction, I included this image so that for your own interest sake, you can read through it. But at least, mass extinction is what got my attention when I was reading through the geologic eras, which can be boring sometimes, but this got my attention. Note that the last predicted mass extinction right here is not happened yet, okay? But it is a prediction where scientists think that it is already happening due to human impact. Things we have already talked about, like deforestations, losing insect and animal species, when we take away their homes, etc. All those things, they think that it could lead to a 6th mass extinction of the Earth, because by the rate of us losing our species in this particular era, they say it is above and much faster than the normal expected extinction rate, because there's a background extinction rate. They understand that there's, animals dying throughout the periods, but they say this is a lot higher than the normal rates that they would expect. So that's why they think it could, scientists do believe that human impact on the environment can lead to a sixth extinction, and that is already happening. All right, so I want to end part one with this particular video because it's really cool. It's actually a 10-minute long video, but I will not show you the entire thing because it's too long. I'll start kind of in the middle about what going back to that first era of we have with the so about 1 billion years ago is where we're going to start with. And then I just think it's really cool because it puts, animations and things that we think happen into a movie that we can watch, a short movie that we can watch. So it might not be 100% accurate now, okay? I want to make that claim, but it is a good imagery and picture of what life on Earth would have looked like if we were able to go back in time and watch the entire evolution as science have theorized it to be. No one will ever know if this is for sure 100% accurate, unless, like I said before, if we can invent time machine one day to see it happening before our eyes. But it is what the science predicts, hypothesize, and theorize according to the best information at hand. And for any ancient history of life, we can only rely on what is left for us to explore, which is the fossils. So here it is what science says regarding how life appeared on Earth. Again, I will skip over the first section because it goes through the whole Big Bang theory, Big Bang where then, not Big Bang theory, but Big Bang theory where the planet where Earth has first been formed, when the sun is formed, etc. So we can skip all that. Going in, you don't have to talk about look at single cells. So we're just going to focus on animal kingdom. So let me get to
stay as a water world finally we had some oxygen much
okay, 1.1 billion years ago. There you go.
Now, as Earth's atmosphere was changing, the continents were moving too. They broke up and reassembled into the next supercontinent, Rodinia. Rodinia was a real supercontinent. It may have been the largest supercontinent to ever cover the planet. And life? Well, life finally became more complex. But then something happened. Rodinia broke apart and a new supercontinent assembled. This one was called Pannotia. Then, between about 540 and 485 million years ago, there was an explosion of new life.
That's Cambrian
This time
explosion?
was called the Cambrian explosion. And the animals that evolved during this period had hard body parts, like shells or spines. The most famous of all were the alien-looking trilobites. Around 440 million years ago, the climate suddenly shifted and the temperature of the ocean changed dramatically. Earth saw its first mass extinction event. This was the Ordovician Silurian extinction, and a majority of the life that had been spreading around the planet vanished. Many of these life forms laid the foundation for the ecosystems that we have on Earth today. Somewhere between 420 to 350 million years ago, the first trees arose from Earth's soil.
There's the plants
and
we talked about.
The first animals made their way to land, too. 250 million years ago, the planet was covered by our last vast supercontinent, Pangaea. Sadly, it was also during this period that Earth witnessed the greatest mass extinction event in our history, the Great Dying.
Permian extinction.
Huge amounts of greenhouse gases and accelerated global warming wiped out about 90% of all species on Earth. But this mass extinction helped pave the way for the next wave of animals to evolve. 240 to 230 million years ago, the first dinosaurs appeared. For the next 150 million years, they'd rule the land. If you were there, you'd have witnessed the gigantic sauropod Argentinosaurus, the largest land animal ever. Or you might have been chased by one of the Earth's greatest
No, I don't want
apex
that.
predators, the T-Rex. And you'd also witness Pangea breaking up and forming the continents we know today. Okay, you may already know where this is headed. 66 million years ago, an asteroid slammed into our planet, right where Mexico sits now. And it coughed up so much debris into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun. This led to devastating climate changes that caused the dinosaurs to die out. In the next wave of emerging animals, mammals became more common. Around 6 million years ago, the earliest known humans started walking this world. This species was called Sahelanthropus, though they still likely walked on all fours. 4 million years ago, early humans began to walk upright, and about 1 million years later, they developed the first known tools, which they used to break things. Some 800,000 years ago, things sparked. These early humans discovered how to control fire and could now cook food and provide themselves with heat. Their brains continued to evolve, now more rapidly than ever. These humans learned to interact with each other and the surrounding world in whole new ways. Then, between 40,000 to 15,000 years ago, all other human species besides Homo sapiens went extinct. 10,000 years ago, Earth saw its earliest farmers. These previously nomadic humans stopped wandering the planet and finally put down their roots. Jumping way forward to about 250 years ago, the Industrial Revolution took place. We went through major technological, socioeconomic, and cultural transformations. Rural-based farm societies became more industrialized urban ones. Our human population continued to grow. By 1804, we reached 1 billion. By 1927, we'd hit 2 billion. And since the 1960s, the global population has risen faster and faster to where it is now, at over 8 billion people. And now there's a new threat to human existence and many other forms of life here on Earth: climate change. Temperatures and sea levels are rising worldwide, and biodiversity is declining. We could be on the verge of another mass extinction event if things don't change. But that's a story for another What If.
Okay. So I kind of like his video. It was made it pretty interesting. And then so here it is, hour 15 minutes. I'm sorry I went over time a little bit. But you could have paused whenever you needed a break. And then I'll come back in part two.